from the moment you launch your church, it's like giving birth to a baby. You can't put it back.
Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, Where God is at Work, a podcast that sits at the intersection of missions theory and practice. We're walking on our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauli, missions leader serving in Rome, here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, church planter in Cisterna di Latina, and Jen Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And today is our interview day on church planting, and so we have with us also Alex or Alessandro Brito, right?
Whatever it is easier, brother.
Welcome, Alex. Alex is the training and coaching catalyst for the London project, which he will explain more about later, and serves as a city-to-city Europe link trainer. He's also the pastor of Mosaic Multicultural Church in Elephant and Castle, London. Prior to planting two churches and replanting a struggling congregation, he had a business background and studied theology in Brazil. He is currently pursuing a master's degree in theology at the Union School of Theology. And alongside his wife, Aluana, he is a proud father of 3 daughters. Alex is passionate about connecting with people, enjoys reading, and loves barbecuing. Just sounds very Brazilian because I love the churrasco from the Brazilian brothers.
I'm getting hungry.
That's awesome. I also was thinking as I was reading your bio, Alex, that there has to be a lot of elephant in the room jokes in Elephant London. I could just imagine, but I digress to not church planting. Anyways, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I hope I can be helpful somehow.
Well, before you are helpful, it would be very helpful if you help us break the ice with this icebreaker.
Let's do it.
We want to talk about language blunders. So let's go around and share some embarrassing moments where we might have been misunderstood speaking in a second language, or just some cultural difference that we faced on the field. Anybody want to go first and set the tone?
Well, I can. When I was in language school, I really liked the woman who was the administrator of the school. And as we were getting towards the end, I thought it would be fun just to go out to lunch with her. And so I said, "Hey, would you like to go out to lunch?" And she said, "Sure," and something about, "Are you inviting me?" And I thought, well, yeah, that's what I just did. Well, in French, when you use the word invite, it means you're paying. So I did not know that, and I let her pick the restaurant, and it was rather expensive, and we were like on a tight budget at the time. And I thought, well, this is a good lesson to learn. So now I'm very careful, and I actually learned it on a grand scale because I work with an organization called RISE, and we try to call together global women leaders. And if we say to someone in many parts of the world, particularly the global south, in Africa, we'd like to invite you to RISE, they read that as we are paying their way.
Wow.
And so this is a really good lesson for me to learn. And we have to rework our whole letter to say something like, would you like to participate in, like, it's hard to send this invitation letter without using the word invite.
Wow. In my case, I got permission from my wife to share this. It just happened a few days ago, and it was just so funny that we were both laughing at it. But my wife is Italian, is great, but she's still learning. She's Filipina and American. And in America, getting licensed for anything, it's like a big deal. You always boast about all the licensing you can get. And so we had an Italian couple at our house, and he just told us that mi sono licenziato, which sounds like licensing, which means I quit. I left my work. And my wife goes like, "Congratulations." And so it was really funny. Like, it was like, wait, you're congratulating me because I quit my job? So it was really funny. And then afterwards, she's like, why? Did I say something wrong? And I said, well, that actually means he quit, not that he's licensed himself in something. She thought that because he's studying to be an engineer. And so she thought that he passed the test to be an engineer. it was totally off. But that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I don't mind going next. So I came, yeah, my first time in London, I'm from Brazil. So my first time in London, I came to study English as a second language. And at that time, you were allowed to work for 20 hours in a week. Okay, even as an international student, you could work for 20 hours, and that was really helpful to pay my bills and to help me to buy whatever I wanted to buy. So my first job, it was in a restaurant, because that was the job that was available near my house, and I was assisting the chef. Okay, but here's the thing: one day the cleaner was not around, and the manager asked me to go to the toilet and mop the toilet because there was a floor there. It was a mess. So I said, I don't mind. I can go to the toilet and mop it. But here's the thing: I came to study English as a second language, right? So my English was not great. So I'm in the toilet, mopping the floor. A customer comes in. He sees me wearing a chef clothes. So he begins asking me a lot of questions. And all I could say was, yes, yes, yes. I go back to the kitchen, wash my hands, get ready to keep assisting the chef. And the manager gets inside of the kitchen shouting. He was mad because he said, there is a table out there. They consumed a lot of wines. They had a lot of meals. It was a proper party. They don't want to pay the bills. And then he says, uh, why did you tell them, Alex, that you are the chef? Why? They are really upset because they were saying that it's not right for the chef to be in the toilet cleaning, and you said that besides being the chef, you are also the cleaner when he was asking you questions. So whenever he was asking me questions, I just said yes. So I was confirming whatever he was asking me, and
Oh,
I think I caused a lot of harm to the to the restaurant on that day. Yeah, a big lesson was never say yes if you don't understand the if you don't understand the question. Never say no. So yeah, that was my awkward moment in the past.
oh wow, that's good. I think there's a sermon in there about the humble chef who also cleans the floors of the bathroom. Well, I like to tell a story. When I moved to Italy as a child before coming as a missionary, and when I came here, I forget, middle school, yeah, middle school age, and I didn't speak anything, so there was it was hard to converse with my classmates. But one thing we could all converse on was sports, right? Everyone could, kick a ball around and have fun with that. And so we were outside playing calcio, football, soccer, whatever you choose to call it in your neck of the woods. And all of a sudden, I saw the guy I was defending step outside of bounds with the ball before coming back in and beating me. But he beat me by going outside of the boundaries. And so we were outside, it was a spring day, and I just started yelling, Fiore, 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 because that was the only word that I knew could mean, that meant out. Little did I know, I'd learned that moment that I was yelling flowers, flowers, flowers instead of out, out, out. And one of my classmates came over and he shook me and he said, "Stop pointing to the flowers and play." He didn't quite realize that I had made the mistake of fuori and fiori. And then later they said it's fuori, fuori. And so I will always be remembered as the kid that pointed at the flowers during the soccer game. Those are great. I feel like I know you all so much better now that we have discussed our embarrassing language
Yeah.
blunders. Well, great, Alex. We had you on here not knowing that you were also a chef, but we were really interested in hearing kind of about your journey to church planting. Could you fill us in a little bit on how you went
Yes.
from mopping
Yeah.
floors and being a chef
That's right. Yeah.
to being a church planter?
That's right. So as I mentioned, I came as an international student to London from Brazil in 2003. By that time, I grew up in a Christian home, but by that time I was far, far away from God. Yeah, I didn't want anything to do with Christianity, with church. Anyway, here I was in 2003 in my 20s. And my mother sent me a book called The Pilgrim's Progress. I read the book, and somehow all that knowledge that I had about the gospel in my mind found a place in my heart. And I read it again because I could see something was happening in my heart. So I read it again, but during the second time with the Bible in my hand, looking at the stories shared in that book and comparing it to Bible passages, and I could not deny the fact that I was in love for Jesus in such a way that I was on fire, brother. I I was so happy, so joyful to get to know Jesus, not only with my brain but also with my heart. That I want everyone around me to experience that. In other words, I began sharing the gospel with everyone. I That helped me to learn English actually, because I was like, wow, I want to make sure people know this good news. I hope people can also go through the same transformation. What happened at that time was I was sharing the gospel with people. Some of them became believers. We then began reading our Bibles in my living room. A year later, I'm on the phone, and I've got an uncle who is a pastor in Brazil. And I told him, I became a believer. I shared the gospel with some people. We are now reading the Bible in our living room. Isn't that awesome? And he said, well, that's a church plant. And I said, okay, you better unpack that. I'm not into gardening. You better explain, what do you mean I'm a church plant? I'm planting a church. He said, no, that's how we call those who are starting new churches. So I keep saying, brother, that I became a church planter by accident. Okay, I did not sign up for this. I did not know that I was coming from Brazil to London to become a church planter, to plant a church. And he's the advice my uncle gave me at that time. He said, okay, this group of people, it's what we call the church. Um, you better not do this alone. Find a local church that can help you in this process. Just to add something very quickly, that was a Portuguese speaking group, okay? Because that's my mother tongue. So what did I do? I got in touch with an English speaking local church here in London, and I said, I've got a group of people. We are studying the Bible on a weekly basis. I've got an uncle who is a pastor. He told me to get in touch with you and share that with you. What do I do next? So they allowed us to start using their venue for free. It was basically a kind of partnership, and we built a really nice friendship with this local church, and that was the birth of a Portuguese speaking church in London. 2 years after that, I was in need of discipleship. Okay, so this is a new believer leading a church plant without any kind of theological training. So I decided to join a Bible college here in London, mainly not because I wanted to become a pastor. It was mainly because I was in lack of discipleship, and in my mind, that would give me this kind of discipleship that I was in need of. My English was improving. I was getting this theological training, and I began sharing the gospel with English speakers. When they became Christians, I would normally send them to an English speaking church in our community. But there was a lady from Budapest in Hungary. She quite felt offended by it, I think, when we said, well, find a local church. And she said, no, I want to be with you guys. Why can't I be part of your church? And I said, well, we are a Portuguese speaking church. And she said, that's fine. Can you translate the service? Can you do interpretation? And we thought, okay, why not? So she got baptized in this Portuguese speaking church. We were doing interpretation in London. Okay, this is a very important thing for us to understand here. It's a Brazilian leading a new church in Portuguese, and a Hungarian lady who doesn't speak Portuguese began attending this service. Okay, and we need to do interpretation from English from Portuguese to English in London. I came from the business sector, okay? So in my mind, I was in my 20s. I came from the business sector. I look at this and I thought, this is not right. Why can't we just become an English speaking church so we can reach more people? Why can't we become a kind of intercultural church rather than a monocultural church so we can embrace any culture? I don't need to send them anywhere else. As we share the gospel with people here, let's welcome them in our community. That's how I thought. Okay, that's how I thought. I sat down then with the leadership of the church. Okay, it was a congregational way of leading the church. So I sat down with them and I said, I know this began all by accident. So we didn't have a vision when we started. But now I have a vision. We are going to become an English speaking church. We're going to be an intercultural church. We can now go to the streets. We can do door to door. We can do whatever we want because we are not here only to reach Portuguese speakers. However, the leadership of the church, they turned to me and they said, Alex, this is too risky. We are growing. We've got a good attendance here on Sunday. Things are going well. I think that would be too risky. And I had to respect the decision they've made. They said, no, we are not up for the change. We don't want to become an English speaking church. We don't want to change things here. So I stepped down. I'm sharing this now without any kind of bitterness, but when I look back, it was a very difficult season for me because I believe that from the moment a church doesn't want to follow a leader, it's time for the leader to just leave. And that's what I did. I thought, okay, if the church is not up for this kind of vision, and that's what I want to do, I would rather step down. And that's what I did. I stepped down from the leadership. I was quite hurt with the reality of we don't want you to be leading this anymore. That's what I heard. And so I was hurt. So I left ministry. That's what I did. I said, you know what? It was good. I didn't move to London to be ministry, to be a church planter. Maybe God is using this to say, well done. It was good that you started this, but that's not for you. Go back to business. So what did I do? I used this as an opportunity to move back to Brazil. I began working for an organization that was doing business to business. I was enjoying my life, having a good time, doing what I love. And but I didn't want to be in a big church, So I joined a church plant because I was keen to just be part of another church plant. And one day the church planter said, Alex, I know you used to preach before. You've got some theological training. Would you be keen to preach for us in the future? And I said, yeah, why not? Why not? Okay, to tell a long story short, what happened was he gave me the opportunity to pick any passage in the Bible. I still don't understand or don't remember why I chose Matthew 9, the last part of the chapter, verses 35 to 38, if I'm not wrong. It's when Jesus looks at the crowd and he sees that they are helpless, harassed, like sheep without a shepherd. Okay, I'm preaching this sermon. Okay, and then by the end of it, he turns to his disciples and he says, pray for the Lord of the harvest to send more laborers. As a preacher, I could see not many people are engaged with this, but my heart is on fire. I was preaching to myself. I could easily see that was for me. I don't know. Until this point, I don't know if people were paying attention. I don't know what was the impact of that message, but I know that was impactful. Anyway, I tried to ignore that for a long time, but I realized that I was struggling to sleep for 3 months. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I could not sleep. And I'm not that person. I'm very chilled. I'm very relaxed. I decide when I'm going to sleep, and I sleep, brothers and sisters. And I knew what was that. I knew what that was. And I turned to the church planter one day and I said, I think God really wants me to go back to ministry. And here's what he said. I think so. I think you're right. I think you should be back in ministry. And then he said, why don't you get in touch with the principal of our local seminary here and share your story with him? When I went to the seminary to talk to the principal, I introduced myself and he said, I've been waiting for you. That's what he said. And I decided to take another theological training in this local seminary while helping this church plant. And in the meantime, my uncle, who is a pastor, he was invited to revitalize a church. And he said, I would love to work with you. Why don't you join the core team and help me to revitalize this congregation that needs some help? So I stepped down from the other church plant and join my uncle in this new revitalization. What happened was, after a few months, we found out why the church was in need of revitalization. It was not the change happening outside in the community. It was the lack of change inside of this church. This church was in need of radical changes. So instead of revitalize the church, we decided to replant it. What do I mean by replant this church? We had to end the life of the church. In what sense? We decided to inform the community that that church was not in operation anymore. And after that, we after a few months, we told the community there is a new church being planted here. But it wasn't a new church being planted, right? We were still using the same venue. Therefore, we were still carrying with us a lot of the history of the previous church. So the whole idea was we communicate to the church that whatever the harms caused by the church in the community that happened in the past, we bury that so we can start from scratch here again. And we did that for 5 years. The church was flourishing, was growing. The majority of those who joined, they were teenagers, a lot of kids, a lot of children. There was a good momentum at that time. And in year 5, I was asked by my uncle and by our mother church. My uncle was already retired, so I was asked, "Are you taking over this? Are you taking over this church?" And I said, "No." And why not? Because I can't forget London. I can't forget the reality that London is the greatest mission field in the globe. There are 9 million people. We've got 37% of the population who comes from outside the UK, foreigners, migrants. And if I want to accomplish Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20, I don't see a better place than London to do that. In other words, I think God was putting in my heart this desire to go back to London, and that's what I did. So in 2015, I moved from Brazil to London to plant the church that I did not plant in the past, an English speaking church, an intercultural church. We completed 10 years now. We moved in April 2015. So this is a special moment for me, for my family. And we joined the church planting network called Commission. They helped us to plant this new church called Mosaic Multicultural Church from scratch. We launched publicly in 2018, so we are in our 6th year, and God has been good to us. It's intercultural, it's very missional, it's biblical, and looking back, I thank God for what He has been doing through this church through our lives as a result of that. That's a long story, brother. I'm sorry I took a lot of our time here. I think this background is quite important.
Oh, it's very important. We didn't ask this in the bio, but I was trying to do the math on how old you would be because you look so young, but the years of ministry experience adds up to like 40 years or something. I don't know. My math isn't the greatest, but wow, thank you so much for sharing that, Alex. And yeah, I do think there's a lot to be said on so many parts, especially even the idea of realizing instead of revitalizing a church when it's time to close and kind of put an end to an era and start with the proverbial new wineskins, So very good, very interesting. So thinking about this You've shared a little bit about the background and hearing kind of the journey that God had you on. Maybe you didn't embark on that journey at the beginning thinking of the destination you would have being the church planter and leader of Mosaic. What can you tell us about what your ministry looks like currently? It would be interesting to hear not just about the church, but also you mentioned a mission that you kind of that helped in starting this. So just kind of what's currently on your
Mm-hmm.
plate as you're pastoring and church planting? Would you consider your church still a church plant at this point? Maybe that would be a good first question.
Well, that's a great question. According to the church planting manuals, yes, we are, because we are not self sustaining, we are not self governing. So, because of that, I think some experts would call it a church plant. And that's the reason why I'm a bivocational church planter. Okay. I've always been a bivocational, or some would call it co-vocational. So I always had another job in order to provide for my family. So yeah, I would consider us still as a church plant according to some church planting manuals, but at the same time, I mean, ecclesiology is something we all have our different perspectives. I would call it a church. It's a church. We meet every Sunday. We hear God's word. We disciple one another. We equip leaders, empower them. We go out on the streets. We share the gospel. It's a church. And I love it. Yes, and as I said, I have another work, and this work is with the London Project. The London Project is an initiative of City to City, a ministry that Tim Keller from Redeemer in New York started many years ago. We don't call it City to City in London because we want to clarify that whatever we do here is for those serving in London. And it's been a joy because they love what I do as a church planter. They want to support, so they give me a lot of time to dedicate to my church plant. But at the same time, the church also loves to see what we are doing through the London Project, which has three main goals. The London Project wants to unite the church in London. We want to strengthen the church in London, and we want to help the churches in London to multiply. So unite, strengthen, and multiplication. I began work as a catalyst in order to foster the unity of the church. My job was to connect with leaders in London and convene those connections. I would meet leaders. I would find out what their needs are, how we could help them, how could we connect with people who have the same passion, and that's how we were fostering partnerships and collaboration. I was also facilitating co-creation. So I would go to a community, I would bring leaders together, we would discuss what needs to take place in that community in order to see the gospel flourishing. However, eventually I went through a training that Alessandro also went through called the Train the Trainer training, which is run by City to City in order to equip trainers for their learning communities. And I felt in love with it. I thought, wow, I love this. I don't need to be the expert in front of the room. If training for City to City is to facilitate learning, I I would love to do that because as a catalyst, that's what I do. But now I would have a lab where people come to take training and I would help them to be sharing their expertise in the room rather than sharing my expertise from the front. So my job is to facilitate asking them questions. Bro, I felt in love with that approach, with that way of training. And as a result, I became a kind of a training catalyst for the London project. I began recruiting potential trainers, identifying and recruiting trainers from different backgrounds to be helping us to keep this growing here in London. At the moment, we have 16 trainers from 12 different parts of the globe as part of our team, all of them church leaders. So they are not employed by the London Project. They are just part of this movement. Some of them don't want to get paid because they say, now this is how we want to serve London. So please, whenever there is a need for us to come alongside and train leaders, count on us. So we've got a beautiful team now. And because the training is going really, really well, I'm now helping with a different part of what I call the ecosystem, which is coaching. I also love coaching. Looking back, I wish I had someone walking with me, asking good questions that would help me to make better decisions, that would help me to deal with issues in a better way. So now I'm in the process of trying to identify and recruit trainers of coaches so we can start training coaches here for church planters. So that's what I'm doing at the moment with the London project, helping with training and coaching. And going back to your question concerning the church, I think whether you are a part of established church or a church plant, I'm not into a kind of solo game thing, if you know what I mean. I believe in the plurality of leadership and also having having the whole congregation taking part of this. So I think by being a bivocational, that had to be very intentional in all of my church plants. I never allowed the church to rely on me only. I needed to allow others to get involved as well. So I just came back from a sabbatical. I don't know if you ever heard that before. How can a church planter go on a sabbatical? Well, we could because we had leaders in place who could carry on the work without relying on me. So I took a 3-month sabbatical. And let me be honest here, things were much better without me. That was my expression because our outreach work improved during my break. We had people in our church preaching more often because I was not there. In other words, they became better preachers. We had to allow some of our leaders to be dealing with pastoral care in a way that I don't think I would be the right person to be dealing with certain issues. But because I was not there, those issues were dealt in a much better way. So the way I lead is just by empowering people around me to just be part of this journey. So yeah, I don't work full time for the church. I work 2 days a week. You know how it is. It's my baby. The church is my baby. On paper, we were saying 2 days a week, but yeah, I would dedicate more. But yeah, that's the background of what I'm doing here.
Alex, I appreciate so much about what you're saying. And when we planted here in Lyon, we actually had the same mindset. Even though we're full-time missionaries, we had other ministries and other things we were involved in. And so we were like, we'll give this project this amount of time. And it wasn't because we weren't passionate about it. It was because we were passionate about it succeeding and people owning the project, not just us. So part of that vision was actually planting with a leadership deficit in the sense that we needed people from the beginning to engage in the project, to be committed to the project, whether it was coming early to set up chairs or organizing a bring and share meal or, facilitating prayer times or whatever. If we could have done it all from the beginning, I think it actually could have handicapped the church. So I really appreciate what you're saying. Besides the fact that in many contexts, being a full-time pastor isn't actually sustainable in the economies with the sizes of churches that people are planting in a lot of places. These smaller communities can't pay the bills in a building and support a full-time pastor. And so oftentimes missionaries and foreign workers can create a church planting model that's not sustainable within the context. So I just really appreciate what you're saying there. And about the London project, I wonder if you could say more there. I think sometimes unwittingly, denominations can see other churches as competitors.
Correct.
And we stand in this place of, oh my gosh, you're doing this project. Well, don't take my best people, or don't, we don't want to be generous with our resources and with our members and all of those things to see God's kingdom expand. And yet, even the research shows that churches that have a planting mindset not only plant churches, but they grow themselves because they are having this outward looking growth sort of mindset. So I wonder if you could say more about how you've created, how that community has developed, and how the collaboration is fostering that better than competition might be.
Yeah, so I planted from scratch. So initially, everything felt on me or my wife or my family, but on purpose, Jen. And this is hard for someone like me, okay? Again, I love to see things being done in a proper way, okay? So sometimes I had to control myself doing things that needed to be done so I could create a kind of crisis. Okay, the chairs are not. We need to put the chairs up. Okay, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Okay, someone needs to get the refreshment. Alex's wife has not done it today, and we really want some. Okay, don't do it. I would tell my wife, don't do it. So I think, yeah, but also empowering people. You know what, Jen? I've realized that people want to serve, but sometimes they avoid doing it for two reasons. Number one, they are afraid. They don't want to take a responsibility, not knowing what that means. So a few years ago, when we began recruiting people, we would say, here's your job description. And in the job description, I would only have 3 points or four, just to clarify. Yeah, I'm not asking you to run the church. I'm not asking you to take a responsibility that is beyond your capacity. I'm asking you to do these three things. And here's the thing, you don't need to tell me now. Think about it, pray about it, and then you tell me if you can do it or not. And I'm 100% with you. We need more modules. I think there are a lot of church planters out there under a lot of pressure because they need to raise a lot of funds to keep things going, and it gets to a point that becomes extremely stressful, and it can also influence in the way they are doing things. I met a church planter recently that he had to spend hours and hours preparing his sermon because his sermon needs to be great in order to keep attracting more people and giving a good report back to the church that are helping him. And I thought, man, you need to be on the street. You planting a church, okay? I love preaching. I see the importance of it. But in a church plant, there are a lot of other things you need to be focusing on. And let's be honest, giving all these hours to preaching, it's not going to help you to plant this church. So, but I could see why. Okay, he had to somehow impress. And why? Because that would help him to keep receiving the grant, and the list goes on and on and on. Okay, the London project. Yeah, I would say, Jen, our main priority for 4 years, we are now in our year 4, it was helping churches to see the importance of collaboration. So competition is a big thing, not only in London, but in many other places. It's a cultural thing we have. I still don't understand why, because the Bible is so clear that when you become part of God's family, you become part of His kingdom. We are all on this together. But the reality is, yes, there is a lot of competition. I remember in my early days here in London, I had at least three pastors get in touch with me to say they were very concerned and that they did not like the fact that I was planting near their area. These are leaders who come from the same tribe as I am, okay? These are leaders whose theology is very similar to mine. So I had to deal with a lot of this in practice. So yeah, competition. How do you move people from competing to what I call coexisting? Because later on, some of these churches they realize, okay, we don't like the fact that he's planting a church in our area. Let's find a way to coexist with it, but it's still far away from collaboration. So we want to move from competing to coexisting to communicating. Okay, so I did that on purpose, not only as someone who works for the London Project, but also as a church planter. Every single church in my community, I got in touch with them. I introduced myself. I want to clarify that I'm not in the area to steal people from their church. On the contrary, I want to reach non-Christians. So the London Project is trying to help church to move from competing to coexisting to communicating to get to what we call collaborating. Okay, we've done a lot of things in 4 years. One of the things we've done was to provide meals, dinners, so church leaders could come, have a meal together, and get to know one another. We paid a lot of money for that, Jen. We're talking about a lot of money. We had at least 9 dinners with an average of 50 leaders per dinner. Okay, if you go to our website, you're gonna see a dinner that we organized in a year ago. We had 400 leaders in a room having a meal together. And we are not inviting them to join a conference. We are not inviting them to listen to a talk. We don't have any agenda apart from spend time to get to know one another. Of course, we share a few things, but it's mainly to cast vision. We tell them, look around you. What would London look like if we start working together? This is just a tiny representation of our churches. What could we do together that would have a huge impact in London if we just take collaboration more seriously? So yeah, this is something we gave a lot of our attention in the past 4 years. We are now developing a training on collaboration. Neil Powell, who is one of the co-directors of the London Project, he wrote a book on collaboration. His doctoral dissertation was on collaboration, and we are now turning this into training to help leaders to see the importance, but also the biblical mandate of all of us to collaborate. So the biblical theology of collaboration, if you go through it, you don't see collaboration as optional.
Right.
You need to find a way. You need
Who
to find a way.
Who did you say that was?
Neil Powell.
Neil Powell. Okay. And also, doesn't Martin Robinson work in your area?
Oh, yes. We engaged with him. Yeah.
Yeah, because he has also written a great book on missional communities. I'd have to go look it up, but he's also great with that collaboration piece, I believe. Yeah,
there are a lot of people around the world, and I think that's the kind of thing we're gonna hear more often.
I was gonna say I really appreciate you sharing your story and everything regarding London Project and the trainings that you got. I have a very similar story to yours where I kind of didn't choose to be a church planter. It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
But now let's maybe sort of a wrap up. If you were to kind of say, okay, now there is someone who actually is saying, I do want to be a church planter. I didn't jump into it. I wasn't accidentally fall into church planting. What advice would you give to a church planter, not soon to be church planter? Okay, I'm young. I feel like God calling me. What should I do now that we've learned our mistakes?
I would say if your church is behind you, thank you so much, brother. Go for it. Go for it. We need more churches. I think the best way to reach non-Christians is by planting your church. So go for it. However, don't do that alone. Don't put yourself or your family, your spouse under unnecessary pressure. If your church is backing you up, your network is backing you up, make sure you've got the support. The support. What do I mean by support? It's not only financial support. If you can plant with others as part of your team, do it. If you can go through a training such as the incubator that City to City runs, go through it. If you can have a coach, make sure you've got someone helping you. If you can get a mentor who is someone totally different from a coach, someone who can tell you what you actually need to be working on. Don't do this alone. That's my advice, Alex. Don't do this alone. Make sure you have an ecosystem around you. And I understand, depending where you are, that's almost impossible. But again, I would say it's when get in touch with Jam. We mentioned Jam here earlier. Get in touch with City to City. Get in touch with an organization that might not be in your town, in your city, to give you some advice on who are the people who could be helping me here in my city because I don't have this ecosystem. That would be my advice. Don't do this alone.
Wow, that's a familiar phrase. I feel like we've talked in this podcast, season 1 or season 2, a couple times about not doing things alone and doing things with others. Alex, those are some great things that you brought up, and it's encouraging, I think, for me at least, as someone who's an aspiring church planter, to hear kind of the journey that you were on, but then also the intentionality right now of being with others. And I was joking a little bit earlier, but I do think something. And I would love to hear your comments on this too. Maybe sometimes our idea of the timing is different than God's idea, and some of this stuff takes more time because you are building rapport, you are growing in community, and so I think of cross-cultural workers, like yourself, going from Brazil to London, or our situation of going from the United States to Italy. You kind of have been preparing in a sense, or that a move's coming because you buy plane tickets far enough ahead, and you're just anticipating going to do this work, and then the anticipation is that things would happen quick, and right when you land, stuff would start, and it doesn't happen that way, right? It takes a little bit more time, and
in other words, have the right expectation as well.
Coming in with the right expectation is so important. Just wanted to give you some space if you had any other things to add as far as maybe tips or resources for people who are church planting or considering church planting. That would be great to hear. Any kind of last thoughts on some of that?
I think what you mentioned is so important. I had a supervisor / mentor who said, be careful about timing, because from the moment you launch your church, it's like giving birth to a baby. You can't put it back. Okay. So be careful. Make sure you're doing it because it is the right time. And if I was going to plant, even the church that I'm planting now, I would say take more time. Take more time. And if there are people putting pressure on you, be clear that you are leading this and you don't think it's the right time. If you're not 100% sure, don't do it. So again, I'm sharing my own experience here. I think I needed more time. I launched with 2 families. It's a miracle that we survived. Okay, and I had the resilience to go through that. And I had God actually giving me the strength to go through so many disappointments that I had to face because it was not the right time. And the second thing is, be comfortable with the idea that you might fail and things might not work. So I shared with you the experience I had many years ago. When I look back, I thought, you know what? That was actually better than not doing anything. Did I get myself hurt in the process? Yes. If God had asked me to do it again, would I do it? Oh, for sure. Better than not doing anything. Failure for me is not doing anything, not taking risks. So risk is right. Of course, I'm talking about taking risks that take into account a lot of mistakes that can be avoided. I'm not saying don't take planning into account. Take planning into account, but don't expect everything to be in place in order to start a church, to plant a church. Be comfortable. Be comfortable with the idea that maybe your church is not going to be an established church in the future, and that's fine. That's fine. God is going to get the glory anyway. He is the one who grows the church. He is the one who saves. He's the one who chose us to be doing it. So be confident about that. You are not alone. Matthew 28, verse 20, Jesus promised us he will be with us to the end. He didn't promise any good, quick result. He did not promise us anything else. He told us, go, make disciples, baptize them, teach them to obey everything. And here's the promise, I will be with you. So do it without fearing it.
Very good. Jen, Alessandro, any last thoughts on this amazing interview that we just had?
I wish we met before I church planted, Alex. I could have avoided a lot of things.
I don't know if I would be so helpful, brother. I'm still making mistakes.
That's great. And as I was sitting here listening to the things that you were talking about, I was just encouraged by faith. The word that stuck out was faithfulness. And I think sometimes
Yeah.
we think faithfulness means sticking with the exact same thing, but you were faithful to God first, and He moved you all across the world, back and forth between Brazil and England. And so it was more your faithfulness to Him over necessarily one church plant or one single project or thing. So really appreciate you and encouraged by you, Alex, this morning. We want to say thanks to all of you for tuning in to today's episode. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, that you found it insightful. Your ministry is important, and we hope that you consider your time spent with us as an investment in the work that you do. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share this podcast with your friends. Go check out the London Project and the work that Alex and City to City are doing. And until next time, keep going wherever Jesus leads.